We are webcasting tonight. Anyone that's watching on the webcast, feel free to tweet your questions at #NYPAY and use that rather than the webinar control panel so I can see them and hopefully respond to them appropriately. At the completion of tonight's webcast, you'll be asked to complete a survey for those people that are watching. Please complete the survey. We'd love to know how to do this better, so thank you for that. So my name is Adam Gluck, for those of you who don't know me. I joined MasterCard 20 years ago, and the very first job I had at MasterCard 20 years ago was to put EMV 95 on the website. So I joined fresh out of business school expecting that I could try this out, and if it worked out great, if not, it was going to be a year or two, and here I am, a major portion of my life later, having existed in the EMV world. Over the course of my career there, I published the first set of rules about chip and pin for chip. I worked on the interregional liability shift. I worked on the interchange incentives for the UK. I worked on the chip and pin rules for the UK. Fundamentally, if you're really, really upset with how EMV works, I'm one of the guys you should blame, along with, there are one or two other dinosaurs in the audience along with me that share some of that, but I'll leave you one name for now. I'm gonna, excuse me, thank you for that. Before I introduce the panel, I wanted to just thank Opus, who is our generous sponsor, and we really appreciate their participation, their sponsorship, and for coming here today. So Opus, thank you very much. We really value the relationship between NYPAY and Opus. Thank you again. Now, I would just like to introduce the panel very quickly, and I will actually hand over to my right and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll get a running start at it. So Randy, please.
Well, thank you. My name is Randy Vanderhoof, and I am the both executive director of the Smart Card Alliance and the director of the EMV Migration Forum, and happy to be part of this panel.
I guess we don't have to push the button then?
You do not.
All right, I'm Lee Jurgens. I'm the CEO of a startup which is called Prociant. Prociant is a startup that came out of the Merchant Advisory Group. I was the chairman of the Merchant Advisory Group. I think Mark is probably watching me now, so I have to be very careful with the amount of years that I throw out here. I think it is 10, but being involved, 6, but I was involved with the Merchant Advisory Group for at least 10 years. Out of the Merchant Advisory Group, the Prociant was born, came out of it. A couple of retailers that came together, trying to automate, simplify, standardize the whole chargeback and retrieval process. So we have a program now that does it. Similar to what happened to MCX. MCX was born out of the Merchant Advisory Group also. And I'm pretty sure that other companies will be born out of the Merchant Advisory Group going forward. So very involved with merchants right now, seeing what they're going through after the EMV implementation. I was very involved before the EMV implementation because I was hired by a big merchant myself, and so I know what the pain points are and the after effect of the liability shift that took place in October 2015. It's horrendous for those that didn't switch over to EMV chip, EMV signature. I always say chip because I'm still European. And the chip made more sense than the signature, as you all probably know.
I think you were PIN, right?
PIN.
Yeah, PIN, yeah. And you were saying in your intro that they had an incentive in Europe for switching over. I heard the word incentive. That certainly wasn't the case in the US. There was no incentive at all. There was just kicking at you if you didn't get it right the first time. So I think that was wrong. But we have to live with it.
The introduction.
I promise you, you'll have plenty of time to kick and punch me later. We'll
I'm sorry. I don't want to take the time away from my British colleague.
Hi, my name's Simon Laker. I'm VP Consulting, Consult Hyperion. We're a UK headquartered, US-based consultancy that have been doing EMV migratory efforts for a very long time now. Personally, I've started my EMV journey in 2002 when I joined a electronics test laboratory testing EMV terminals for EMV certification and Visa cards for Visa certification. So nearly 15 years in the world of EMV right now. And today we support merchants, brands, issuers, acquirers in implementing EMV technologies from simple contact cards, might I say, all the way through to sort of host card emulation, tokenization, and the rest.
Thank you, Simon. Manish?
Manish Nathwani. I'm part of the Shazam network. I'm Vice President of Product Development. We're a Des Moines-based national debit network. We have presence in over 38 states, and essentially our working model is about debit cards, debit authorization, both PIN, PINless signature type of transactions, and we are owned by all our customers. We have over 1,300 institutions serving community financial institutions. It's a niche area, and we've been working on all things EMV for the past 3 years at least. I escaped from the UK in in 2000 after having been on EMV for 3 years, and 13 years later after my sabbatical it caught up with me again. So here I am back on EMV in the US with a vengeance. And certainly, as we get into these panel discussions, hopefully I can share the challenges of debit with respect to EMV. So that's me.
Thank you. Avi, please.
Great. Thank you, Adam, David, everyone for being here and listening to us. I'm sure this is very, very exciting. Can't believe there's someone who's actually going to listen to me. I mean, I tell my wife about this and she falls asleep. So my name's Avi Kaner. I own a chain of supermarkets in New York City called Morton Williams. We have 15 supermarkets. We have 2 wine and liquor stores. We have a grab-and-go store. So we're a retailer. We're the ones being kicked. And now we're about to kick back, although our lawyers said I'm not allowed to talk about that a lot.
So we have no idea what you're
But I may anyway.
He ain't using cards in his machines, I know.
Exactly. In a prior life, I was, after business school, I was a principal at Booz Allen in Hamilton, consulting to the financial services industry. This is 20 years ago, including the credit card and payments. So I've got a unique perspective. Plus, besides accepting credit cards, we also use a lot of credit cards, as you can imagine. So I've got a unique perspective.
Thank you very much. So the headlines, to Avi's point, have sounded kind of bleak. And I'll offer a slight counterpoint to that. And it's something I think we spoke about in the hallway. And that is, as we look at the EMV migrations around the world, the US, since the liability shift started, has made more progress than anyone else. It really is going very quickly. Arguably, it's going better than many other implementations. Now, if I was Avi, that would probably just upset me, and I'm glad he's at the far end of the panel, because while it is going well and it is going quickly, it's not for people like the merchants that are bearing the brunt of some of the growing pains. But I think the way through this is going to be through panels like this and us all working together. Now, before we really start, I was hoping to ask a two-part question just to kick it off and make sure we level set a little bit. And I was hoping, Simon, you could give us a little bit of the background of EMV and how we kind of come to where we are here in the US. And then the second part of the question, I was going to really ask Randy to talk about, how we come here in the US particularly, like what decisions did the US make and what kind of story got us to where we are right now. So Simon, if you don't mind, can I start with you?
Sure. I think for years, if you looked on the EMV website and seen the map of EMV adoptions around the world, everywhere would have been in sort of various states of implementation, apart from a slightly grey area of the map which would represent the United States that had no plans to migrate at all. And that's been the position since sort of EMV's been around, really. So adoption has sort of moved ahead certainly in Europe, leading the way. Even parts of sort of Africa, the Far East, South America have all got migration paths well underway. But there came a point when it was clear quite recently that fraud was quite significant here in the US, where the ability to copy a magnetic stripe from anywhere in the world and use the data from that magnetic stripe that was still being personalized anywhere in the world for transactions here in the US successfully was starting to sort of ruffle feathers, let's put it. You'll know from a colleague of mine that his sort of favorite sort of stat a couple of years ago was that the US represented sort of 50% of all payment card fraud for only 25% of all payment cards issued globally. And that's quite an alarming statistic. In fact, here he is now walking in the room 10 minutes late. So it was becoming an issue, and I think that was probably the start of what caused people to think maybe we should come up with ways of mitigating that issue, thinking of new ways of handling that. So I think that was kind of the impetus, the sort of rising fraud levels, I'd say, here in the US that led to the break.
But the other part of that, I think, and the part I was hoping you to get to, was EMV as a standard was created in '95, and EMV as a standard is now tried, true, tested, and as old, but as a technical solution, it's evolved quite a bit from simple keys to complex keys, from simple cryptography to complex cryptography. In a lot of ways, EMV as a underpinning underpins a lot of what's happening in contactless today, and a lot of what's happening with Apple Pay and the other things today. EMV has been a foundational part of a lot of that. So it's important to keep in mind as we talk about the growing pains. I would just caution the panel, or give my opinion, I should say, not caution anybody, and that is we don't want to toss out the baby with the bathwater. If you don't mind,
to that actually, EMV was conceived in a time that retail was the retail model was very different. It was very much a card present model, very tiny amounts of online transactions possible, more mail order, telephone order risks than internet traffic that we see today. So it was born in a very different landscape than we have here today.
Correct. So
wait, before we do that, I was just hoping Randy could help us just a little bit. David told me to keep an eye on you, actually. I was hoping to really ask Randy.
You have to do what David tells you.
I said he's always got an opinion.
I just wanted Randy.
I just wanted Simon to explain why Great Britain and Europe went to EMV. I just want to hear why that technology was chosen. Was it because your telecommunication infrastructure was not as good because it used to be done by the British Post Office, like it was done in Holland by the Dutch Post Office, didn't keep up with technology, so they couldn't do live authorization, which we do in the US, correct? You did batch transactions at the end.
Or offline transactions.
Yes, I mean, that is true that across Europe there is a predominancy for offline authorized transactions due to the cost predominantly of communication networks.
In the past?
In the past. Today, most tier 1, tier 2 merchants will be online.
But that was the main reason. So the reason they, took to do EMV is not the same reason we have in the US. So I just want to make that clear.
Well,
there could have been other solutions in the US. I mean,
let's
be real. We are the guys, and I'm European myself, and I shouldn't say we, but the US invented the credit card. The US has the technology. The US is technology savvy enough to come up with a better and much more streamlined system than following, and I'm not saying, I can say that because I'm actually from Amsterdam.
Say what you like.
Right. What they had in Europe, because they were behind in technology, and now we have to adopt something that because they were behind, we have to adopt something that probably is outdated already.
I think,
Sounds like a pitch to-
But anyway,
wait, but I
I
think.
just wanted to make sure the history why is all
No,
talked
but
about.
that's less about history. So let me just offer Randy an opportunity to talk about the decision that the U.S. made a few years ago. So the U.S. had the opportunity a few years ago to do whatever it chose. And Randy,
It's not because Visa and MasterCard had a contract with Visa and MasterCard in Europe that by a certain date they had to be EMV compliant themselves. That's not the case, right?
not that I know of, but let me ask Randy to talk about.
So there's other factors. Simon, I think, laid out the fraud factor, which is probably the one that has the most serious financial implications for the entire market. But there was a survey that was sponsored back in 2009, 2010, I think, by the EMV group, did the survey. And the survey was about U.S. consumers who shop outside of the U.S. in Europe and Asia and Latin America and other countries, and how their shopping experience has been with the use of magnetic stripe cards. And the survey results came back pretty astonishing in terms of the number of people who reported that they had problems using magnetic stripe cards in an EMV environment. And what their reaction to that was to basically abandon their relationship with their current cardholder and look for another cardholder, perhaps one that offered a chip, or at least one that they felt was more international, and would not have that same problem of acceptance. So that was, I think, the aha moment for U.S. banks who were on the fence about, well, there is fraud loss, but there's also a huge investment here. What's the short-term return on that? And then when they started to realize that they could potentially lose customers because of the lack of global interoperability of the U.S. payment system, and hearing complaints from the foreign banks who issue chip cards, but those cards were being counterfeited for the mag stripe, and those cards were being showing up in U.S. shores, added an extra component to the case for why we moved to chip. You'll remember we did kind of a half step back in 2004, 2005 with contactless cards. It was the first chip enablement of payment cards in the U.S. The contactless or mag stripe emulation mode of chip, which happened there, was at least introducing dynamic data for the first time in the U.S. market, which was seen as a major shift in security. And the challenge that we quickly learned is that unless merchants see the benefit and make the investment in the contactless acceptance, we weren't going to get a lot of use of those contactless cards, and therefore the dynamic data is going to be not very effective in reducing fraud. And so the lessons learned, I think, between the international usage issues and with the lessons about contactless isn't going to really be adopted here unless we get the entire ecosystem to move at the same time and support this dynamic data. Contributed to the decisions that were made now 5 years after the implementation of contactless to announce the rollout of EMV chip with the timeline of October 2015.
But Randy, it's also fair to say that the underpinnings of contactless led us to EMV. Like some of the infrastructure investments could be leveraged to move to EMV. And again, some of those same infrastructure investments that got us to EMV are leveraged when you look at things like Android Pay, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, and XX Pay, whoever the next one is. The idea of having more data in the message, the idea of having dynamic data, the idea of having a terminal that's no longer just reading, but reading and writing, like all of those concepts and ideas are stepping stones to the future. They're not necessarily dead ends where we're adopting a technology that was invented in the UK in '95, and we see a light at the end of the tunnel. It's quite different than that. It really is an investment in a new infrastructure with legs and opportunity for the future. At least that's how I saw it. So I appreciate you giving us the background on why we made the choice in the US, but I think also some of the opportunity it presented was there as well, at least from what I recall.
Yeah, it was making small stepping stones in that process, yes, needed to happen. And one of the value propositions of EMV is that by moving the payment processing side as well as the card acceptance side to this new platform, it provided a much more robust platform than to build upon the other advances that we were hoping were going to gain traction, like the Apple Pays and the Samsung Pays and the watches and the wearables and all of the other things that came along with that.
So with that said, and Leah, I'm sorry, I introduced you, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to finish the path you were going down a moment ago. The U.S. is migrating to EMV now, and I want to ask the panel the question, so I'd like to give everybody an opportunity to opine on this. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Would you think that now, knowing what we know, that the U.S. should consider something different? There's a better opportunity, or is EMV, I think it's the right thing. I've made my position clear, but I'm just wondering for the panel, what do you think? Should we do something different now? Where should we go? So
No, I think it's too late now to turn the clock back. I think every retailer is gonna shoot me because they're already in the process. Some of them already went through the process, which is a very lengthy and very costly process to get certified to do the EMV transactions. No, I don't think we should go back. I think we should go further. And I think that the implementation of the PIN should have been at the same time. I think we should abolish the signature, because even a Visa and a MasterCard, and MasterCard's roadmap was actually PIN. The only one that didn't have the PIN on their roadmap was Visa. Visa was chip and signature. Reason being that there's a lot of issuing banks on the Visa side that can't cope with that two-way messaging system. I'm not a technical guy, but I understood that they couldn't cope with a PIN transaction at this point. So we should have gone for the PIN. I don't think we should turn back the clock. We're there now, and of course I'm against fraud. I don't think, there's already instances where there are fraudulent cases with a chip card, where they change the indicator in the mag stripe from a 1 to a 0. So when you swipe the card, the terminal doesn't know it's a PIN and doesn't ask for it's a chip and doesn't ask to insert it. So they bypass it. So they take a chip card, they copy the mag stripe, they put it on another card, they change the indicator on the back in the mag stripe that says 0, or I don't know if it's 0 or 1, it doesn't matter, they change something, and then you bypass that indicator that you have to insert the card.
some of this is...
But I'm not against, what I want to say, I'm not against new technology. Talking about combat, being able to use a PIN or a chip card abroad, you will see, and in some cases it might work in a hotel or a fancy restaurant, but I've been locked up in an unmanned garage where I couldn't go out. When I inserted my chip card, it asked for a PIN, and I didn't have a PIN. The only way I could get out was using an Amex card. I used it in the restaurant, and I inserted the card and it asked me for a PIN, and I didn't have a PIN, and then it said swipe the card. I swiped the card, and it said it was a chip card, insert the chip. So then you got into a loop, and then you call MasterCard when you get back after an embarrassing moment with your whole family, because the big shot from America is going to pay for dinner, and he couldn't charge it. Anyway, so you get home, and then MasterCard tells you, oh, what you have to tell the waitress, that she has to call for an authorization. That works.
And I appreciate that, so I would ask you...
I don't want to... No, we have to go forward with EMV. We have to go to the chip because that's an extra security on top.
And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to say, Manesh, you're on the edge of your seat, so please. I want to hear what you're ready to say.
No, so Izzy, your question was if I forgot.
My question is, from where you sit, is EMV a good thing for you? Is it a good thing for the U.S.? Like, what's your opinion on
I
it?
think if you step back a little bit, and I'll go back to the late 90s in the UK, it was, with any product, you've got to ask yourself, what's the value proposition? What's the reason why we're doing it? It was created to address a specific purpose. Time went on, and suddenly most of the world had gone onto EMV. So we had, as Randy pointed out, we had an acceptance issue internationally for US cardholders. Now, let's not kid ourselves. EMV Contact is specifically addressing one challenge, which is the card present challenge. There are many areas that is not addressing, so it is not the universal panacea. Anyone who thinks so probably needs to go for another 101, because this subject is hard. This subject is very, very complicated, so I wouldn't blame anyone for going through several 101s on this topic. But the key thing is it a good thing? Well, for that card present channel, it provided an enhanced level of security, counterfeit protection, replay protection. That's it. That is the only thing it really adds, above and beyond mag stripe. I will also step back and say, you throw a pin on that mag stripe, I'm sorry, but what you have and what you know still continues to be one of the most secure forms of transaction. So it's great that it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I like to say, which is we wanted convenience. We went from Moto, key enter type of transactions and upgraded to let's have a card and mag stripe this thing. And now we're upgrading to another form of security, which is chip. So it promises to get better and better. But as soon as you take a second authentication factor off for convenience, all good reasons, you create a problem. And to patch that problem, we need enhanced level of security. So it's kind of there's a cost for convenience. And so has it been a good thing? Back to that question. It's been good for the environment that it's been created for. It's been good for the US to have responded to that. It was a shock to me when I first came to the US and I thought, this chip thing is a big deal in UK and France. Come to the US, it's a predominantly online world. Because the cost of dial-up, I think it was mentioned earlier, cost of dial-up for local calls is free. So point-of-sale calls didn't cost a whole lot, and it was a reliable infrastructure. So you had online transactions going on all the time. And like I said, you throw a pin on it, and you've got a fairly secure transaction.
And the one thing I would also add to that further complicates that, and I'm sorry, Avi, I would like to get your opinion. Next is the neural networks that the issuers implemented during the 90s as well. So in the US, telecom was less expensive. In the US, they were seeing these transactions. In the US, because they were seeing these transactions, they invested massive amounts in these neural networks.
Yep.
Right? So the decision to do something else then got correspondingly more complex because they had to also figure out, if they were able to do really sophisticated things at the endpoints, how do you manage the back office, which is now looking for more data? Right? So the complexity, and I thought that's where you were going from where you sit now. The complexity on someone like you as a as a processor, gets even worse and worse. And
it is. And I was just going to close off. And the main thing is with the challenges of what it's taking to get EMV to the fore. It's a natural evolution. We need to go there. But it's interesting, the reasons we went there weren't really, when we look back, the value proposition didn't demand it because fraud levels hadn't got to a point. And until they became intolerable, it was important we went there. But it still doesn't address card not present and other challenges. So,
no, that's of course. Lee, I'm sorry. Avi, excuse me.
You've been question about is EMV a good thing?
Is it a good thing?
Yes. I mean, technology is good. We don't want to be left behind. I was just in Europe last week visiting our daughter semester abroad. We were there for 8 days. So we ate out twice a day, 16 times, went to a restaurant. Each time at the restaurant, the waiter or waitress would bring the device to our table. We would put our card in, and it would generate a receipt. The card never left my hand, right? In the United States, you go to a restaurant, there's no such thing as a device coming to your table. In the United States, I don't care if you have a chip card or a magnetic stripe card, the waiter or waitress takes a card to the back, okay? Even if you have a chip card in the United States, if someone steals your chip card, they can use it. They could sign the card, they could sign the receipt, George Washington. It doesn't matter. The cashier doesn't look at your signature. If you, I mean,
That's right.
signatures are ridiculous. And I mean, PIN numbers obviously solve the problem. You can have the most primitive magnetic stripe card with a PIN. If someone steals your card, it's useless. Fraud goes away.
We could have installed the PIN network for credit then.
Well, didn't the Europe go to chip and pin eventually?
Yes.
Well, but
Because
the European migration,
Well,
we
what I
look
mean is
back
without
at that
the
as a
chip,
big
the PIN on the
bang.
credit card.
But we look back at that as a big bang, and we look back at that and say, of course, the UK went to chip and pin. The UK started their chip trials in '97,
Yeah.
and they moved to chip and pin in 2000, 2001, right? So it evolved, and I suspect in the US it'll evolve
I agree.
on a quicker time scale, and we'll get there. But all of this, and I was talking to Rod earlier today, half my cards still are embossed. Never mind mag stripe, right? So
Right.
this is an industry that has to accommodate the lowest common denominator for a very long time, and where migration tends to be slow. And I think, to the point I introduced us with, we're moving along pretty quickly. Please,
Can I
please.
continue from a retailer's perspective?
Yes, please.
Okay.
There's
So-
one that's often not hers.
Okay, which is often not heard. Okay, and I'm a little outnumbered here, but okay. From
On the floor.
from a retailer's perspective, okay, imagine tonight you leave here, you go to a restaurant with your husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, go with another couple. You go to a restaurant, you spend $350. Okay, the bill comes, you give your credit card to the waiter or waitress, comes back, swipes it, you leave a tip, so say it comes out to $400, okay? And most restaurants, you know, the town I live in Westport, Connecticut, I haven't found one restaurant that accepts chip. They still all accept the magnetic stripe. The restaurant owner swipes it, gets an authorization code, a Visa, MasterCard, etc., authorization code, it's authorized, you sign it. You can have a video camera there recording you, it doesn't matter. A week goes by, your credit card bill comes in, you call Chase, your card issuer, and say, you know what, I wasn't at that restaurant. In the past, before October 1st, what would Chase do? Chase would, it's called jog your memory. They try to remind you, well, do you remember on that day you also were somewhere else? Do you still have possession of your card? Yes. Was it lost or stolen? No. You have possession of it. They try to remind you that you used it. And if they can't remind you they used it, they issue a dispute. They send it to the merchant. The merchant responds with the proof, the signature, which is useless, but you know, proof that it was physically used, physically authorized, etc. After October 1st, that's no longer the case. After October 1st, you call Chase, tell Chase, I didn't go to that restaurant. Chase says, oh, Mr. Cohen, you have a chip card and it was used in a magnetic stripe. You're not responsible for it. What they do is they send the restaurant a chargeback of $400 and they write on it no recourse. It's on the retailer. Now, we're in the supermarket business. Supermarket net margins in the United States are less than 2%. So let's use 2% as an example. $1,000 to get $1,000 in chargebacks with no recourse means you have to have $50,000 in sales to make that $1,000 profit. That's more than a typical urban supermarket's daily business. And the credit and what's going on, the issuers are really taking advantage of this. And my lawyer said not to mention names, I won't mention names, but some issuers are taking advantage more than other issuers. And they're really taking advantage by not investigating, putting it on the retailers. Now, the interchange you pay, last year we paid $3 million a year. My company pays $3 million a year in interchange. Part of that $3 million is to cover fraud. But now I'm still paying that part of the $3 million interchange, but I'm eating the fraud. So it's just blatantly
I think your
unfair
point
to
is
shift the
that
liability.
there is still a little bit of looseness in how the chargeback process is being
That's
handled.
exactly right.
That each issuer
That's
could probably handle it its own
anecdotal
way.
stories like you just referred to are obviously happening in the market.
We have one issue.
I wouldn't say that's
45%
the
of our
change
chargebacks.
of policy for issuing banks since the liability shift. I would also say that same restaurant that is vulnerable to that can make an investment of less than $500 and that problem goes away.
Okay,
If
now,
they
wait,
put-
let me interrupt
put
you. No, let me interrupt you.
EMV accepting
No, let me interrupt
terminal
you.
in that
That's
store.
very, very, very wrong. We have, our typical store is 10 checkout lanes, okay?
Wait, excuse me, I want to clarify. I'm talking about a restaurant that's
Okay.
using
Okay, let me talk about
table service.
Okay, let me talk about a restaurant. First, I'll talk about us, and then a restaurant. So we have 10 checkout lanes. Okay, a device, an EMV pin pad device might cost $700-800. Not a big deal. Multiplied by 10, you put 10 of them in each store. That's fine. The problem is it doesn't work that way because it has to integrate with your POS system.
understand.
So if you're a restaurant, we just opened a new wine store a month ago, Park Avenue South and 21st Street. We used Chase Payment Tech as the processor. We purchased the pin pads with the EMV from Chase Payment Tech using the software, the number one software for wine stores in the United States. Chase has not certified, Chase, Visa, MasterCard, the networks have not certified the devices. Most of our supermarkets have EMV devices. Most of them have it.
I understand.
They don't work because they're not certified.
Right, and
Yeah, understood. Yeah.
Right, well, but so that's the problem. It's
That's a problem.
a big problem is the certification process itself. Because I remember this very well, and Randy, maybe you remember too, that we were having discussions with Visa and MasterCard, I think in 2013, and 2015 was the date, and I still believe it has something to do with contracts with MasterCard Europe and Visa. But anyway, they were actually, because there was a lot of the issuing banks weren't ready for it either. They were contemplating to shift that date to 2016. And then Target happened. And then all of a sudden, that was gone. That was off the table. Nobody wanted to discuss that date anymore. Well, before that, it almost was on paper, and then Target happened. So we got a little off track. Retail's got off track. And then to implement that in an October period, which is like a blackout period for retailers because that's when their season starts, the Christmas sales.
Wait, but I think you have to be fair to that.
Well,
The
well,
mandate for that, or the announcement for that, didn't come out in August for October,
Then we
right?
had the same.
The announcement came
The
out.
liability shift had been around for.
The announcement had came out for quite some
Absolutely.
time, so people had opportunity to plan.
But the problem you ran into was, A, the manufacturers of the credit card machines didn't have enough EMV terminals.
There were no specs available until a certain
I'm an
point.
ISO and I work with a lot of different retailers, from retail to whatever. One of the big issues that I had was that a lot of the POS systems are not EMV compliant, even if you do put an EMV machine in there, because the card acquirers were not even, there's maybe one or two that are, and it's coming slowly. And the second thing that I ran into, again, from a sales perspective, selling retailers and all these guys and everything like that, I was getting calls left and right in October, or to change whatever, back and forth. There were no EMV machines available. And even if they were available, they were on back order. And then thirdly, which was even worse, all of a sudden a merchant might be running a regular hypercard machine, it's been running great for years. They retire the portfolio in the middle of Christmas.
I'm not saying this went well. To be perfectly clear.
My point being,
But,
hold on, please let me finish. But from the sales perspective, okay, you guys are not you're not in sales. You're on the technology aspect of it, or maybe some of you are. You get a call from an Avi, Morris, my machines are not working. What's going on? Now you got to tell them, well, I'm sorry, they shifted the change from here to there. Oh, and by the way, they're not available. What do you tell a merchant in the middle of Christmas?
I understand, and
Adam.
I was able to, and I completely agree with you. I think, Lee, though, the story you just told 5 minutes ago was about going to a merchant and trying to use their card in a way that should have worked and it didn't. And then going to a parking garage and trying to use your card in a way that should have worked and it didn't. And what both of those speak to is inadequate testing. So we have to figure out, EMV is absolutely complex, and we have to figure out where that balance point is between adequate testing to make sure the terminals work properly and having enough capacity to meet our.
Right, and that's the whole point.
Can I-
And that's the whole point. Are you on the panel too?
I'm sorry. I just one more thing, I apologize. What
It's an
happens now?
interactive discussion. NYPAY prides itself in interactive discussion.
So what happens now when a merchant, okay, is getting hit with all these charges? Now, I have retailers that if they got 2 chargebacks in 6 months, they were lucky. All of a sudden, they're getting hundreds of chargebacks because you're not even compliant. You automatically lose. There's no recourse, no nothing whatsoever.
And it's actually worse than that. If you look at our business in New York City,
I have.
our average ring size is less than $50.
Your ticket.
Yeah, a
Ticket,
ticket.
yeah.
Because in the city you have small refrigerators, right? So, until before October 1st, if a customer came in for anything under $50, as long as the card was physically present and swiped, you didn't even need a signature. So now, after October 1st, we're now getting inundated with chargebacks that we never had before.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing
Because-
is the weakest link loses. And if it's not chip on chip, then the weakest link loses. And this is a transitory phase we're in, which is, not everybody's going to jump into EMV day one. It's been migrating, and it truly is still a migration. And the challenge occurs is that, until all the certifications are complete and not one aspect of the payment ecosystem has been left unscathed. Yep, you've got the terminal certification by brand, not just terminal certification of EMV, but by brand. You've got message certification with merchant host systems. You've got message certification with networks, with processors, with issuers, with Perso validation on the chip. I mean, it's the entire ecosystem. And if they're all moving at their own independent paces,
That's the problem.
you start to have gaps and holes while we're in this migratory
So
state.
I just want to interrupt for 1 second. Randy, I've been doing my best to defend you, but I really should.
You're moderating. You're not defending. You're moderating.
In theory, I'm moderating, but in practice, I should be saying, Randy, you're probably closest to the issuing side on the panel. Like, what's going on in the industry? Like, are you hearing this? What are the thinkings? What's happening?
Well,
Like, I'll give it to you as an open-ended question.
all of the things that we're talking about are happening,
Yes,
okay?
absolutely.
At the same time, there are tens of millions of chip-in-chip transactions that are happening really, really well.
That's right.
And fraud is going down as a result of that. And so what we're experiencing is the turmoil of trying to get the moving parts, which are the cards and the POS manufacturers and the software vendors and the terminal manufacturers and the merchants and the testing providers, all aligned across 4 million merchants in a country that's spread out over 3,000 miles across. So we've got this choppy waters that is going to stay choppy for a while, but it's not that nothing is working, it's that things that are working well, you're not going to hear
but
about.
how do you
You're going to focus on
justify
things that are
shifting
working
fraud
not so
liability?
well.
Well, I mean, that's one of my questions is if in fact what Avi has suggested is happening, and there's strong circumstantial evidence, doesn't that suggest that the rules that tell you how to classify a chargeback should be enforced?
No, the question is, this presupposes that all of these cardholders are committing fraud because they're calling up and saying, I didn't do this transaction.
And that's not even the case. In some cases, it's not even the cardholder that calls. They just issuing banks initiate these things
Oh, come on,
sometimes.
the issuing banks are gonna.
But I think, wait. In all fairness, I think
Yeah.
Avi's original description, it's just my experience, is also part of this. Someone looks at their statement and goes, what's that? I don't remember that. Was I there
That's
then?
an innocent
And they
error.
call up their bank and they say, was I there
In
then?
the old days, you had to sign an affidavit for that. That rule is no longer there. All you have to do is call.
I think it's a valid example where either the upgrade hasn't happened or certification hasn't happened, but not only is the merchant paying interchange, but he's also now liable for the fraud until things start to equalize and everybody's on track.
I would take it a
Jay,
step further.
did you wanna-
I would take it a step further. I would say that the issuers are almost complicit in this fraud. Why do I say that? The reason they're almost complicit in this fraud is because by shifting this liability and not even investigating chargebacks because of fraud liability, they are encouraging fraud. People are learning how to game the system. They tell their friends, oh yeah,
Go on, download Tor, go on the dark web, you have the videos telling you how to do this.
Jay, did you want to ask someone?
Well, I just want to comment now. My disclaimer is I've never met Avi and I have no idea who's litigating for him, but I can see, as a lawyer, I can see what's happened, what his guys are gonna argue. He can't say.
And now I know there are 4 million merchants. Thanks for it.
As long as they can do.
What you really have here is a small number of card interchanges came up with a very good idea for shifting not only fraud, but also the cost of fraud avoidance to the merchants, okay? And I'm not an antitrust lawyer, but I'm formulating in my head a very interesting federal complaint against MasterCard and Visa and Amex and maybe a couple of others. They've all gotten together and shifted a risk that they had formerly borne to, what did you say, 4 million merchants? It's gotta be more than that. But
more.
they've shifted the fraud risk, and they've shifted the cost of curing the fraud risk to people like Morton Williams.
But that's
where
not-
I can go and I can put my card in, and the nice cashier over on 2nd Avenue says, "Oh no, our machine doesn't work yet," and I pull it out and I swipe it.
Jay, wait, that's not entirely correct.
But it's close.
It's not close because what you just described only exists during the phase where you're migrating. Because the way the rules are written is the liability sits with whoever doesn't make the investment. Now, in this instance,
You're forcing
it's
them to-
absolutely.
you're forcing
But I made the
them to
investment.
cost.
I spent $100,000 per store,
I hear you, and that's where
and it doesn't work.
the system has a problem, right?
And those
I
are
think
gaps that have to be bridged.
You're saying you have a choice. Your choice is either to take the fraud risk or to make a massive economic investment in order for us not to have the fraud risk.
But you've already made the investment.
But Jay, you're not quite right.
He's already made the
I agree,
investment.
I'm not quite right, but I'm getting there.
No, because you gotta, if I'm EMV certified and I'm a retailer, right?
And that's the point, it's EMV certified.
Once you're certified, that's the
It
threshold.
works.
Yes.
And I have a bank that sends me a card that's not a chip card, and there's fraud on that card, that liability stays with the bank.
Yeah.
So
Right,
liability
but-
has not been shifted.
And that stays,
Yeah, but
and
I-
that stays even with the
I
bank
have
with,
five
with a
cards.
merchant that doesn't do
I just
EMV.
look and they
The
all
card
have
has no chip, then there's no
So
liability
that's
chip.
not really, you know, and the one that's been compromised 6 times, it gets changed every 3 months. I've gone through I don't know how many chips. So I think, it doesn't take very long for the cards to get fixed.
Yeah.
I represent small banks, and they all issue, banks that are smaller than.
And just so you know-
They all issue chip cards.
Just, you know, I had, in New York restaurants, I've had 2 cards compromised by waiters. So that, they were Mag Stripe cards. So that, from my perspective, I want chip cards in a restaurant, and I want them handled on a chip basis, because I want the dynamic data, so it never happens again.
I agree, but the question is who's going to incur the cost?
Yeah.
And of course, going back to what
Vanish.
what you said, the second guy over. My card's been compromised 3 times, and all 3 times it was internet sales.
So
It was no card present.
So I'd like to excuse me. I'd like to
He was you that bought all that forward. We don't.
It was high-end
Wine.
and
Excuse me, I would like to bring, wait, excuse me, I'm sorry. I would like to just bring this back. I think we've explored this to the extent we can. We understand, I think, the room is clear on the challenge. And I don't mean to minimize it, Avi, not in any way, shape, or form, but I don't know that we're now saying anything that's contributing to the discussion about this
Yeah,
particular.
although I was speaking to someone in the hallway who said something very interesting. They said that in Europe, they use an incentive to migrate. In other words, they said if you migrated, you'd pay a lower interchange, whereas.
Yes, and that
someone
was-
told me. I mean, I'm not
that
an
was
expert
me.
in
It's
it.
true.
Oh, it was you. Oh, you.
I like getting quoted. I
You.
feel
So
so
why did they do that in the United States?
That's why.
Why didn't they do that in the United States?
Because they're profiting from this liability shift. That's
I
why.
think
Didn't
we
fit the
tend to
business
see.
model.
We tend to see. Randy, would you like to talk to
There was,
I gotta say,
I have something to say, but it's not my place.
best panel we've had in a while.
there was, in other countries, there were mandates across the entire system that they all had to move.
Mandates
And
from a government or regulatory agency?
government or regulatory or banking association. In the US, we have no such equivalent to that. So we did need to rely on cooperation with
Big stick.
the penalty should the party that chooses to not make the investment bear the greater portion of the risk.
So
of
really, to
fraud.
the point earlier that the weakest link or whatever it is,
Yeah, it's the weakest
merchant,
link,
the
exactly.
merchant
Yeah.
who pays the least attention to payments because they're not payments people, they just want to sell stuff, they ended up bearing the brunt of it because there was no overall mandate that everyone had to do it.
Well, because there's
Was
nothing
liability
in
a
place.
carrot or a stick?
I mean, we wouldn't be sitting here today having this conversation if there was a mandate that every merchant, including Avi at the
Yeah,
end there,
clearly.
had to implement their technology and get it tested and certified.
And by using that,
By
as, as
2015.
an incentive or a stick,
Yeah.
it essentially allows weaknesses in the rules process enforced by the networks to be exploited.
But they
Yes.
still have
No,
the
that's
liability shift
that's a
and everything.
really fair, David. That's a
Yeah.
really fair statement. I think, though, if you look at the UK, though, it really parallels the US quite a bit. The UK started UKIS in '93, which was the precursor, with a precursor to EMV, 93, 94, and the PR on that, at least, being working at MasterCard in the US at the time, was the UK banking industry was worried about being legislated and regulated. So the UK banking industry said, fraud's going up, it's not that big yet, but it's going up really quickly. And if I don't do this now,
Someone's going to tell me.
they're going to tell me how to do
That's
it, and I
right.
might not like the way they tell me how to do it.
Right.
So we're going to do EMV in the UK. Now, arguably, it's not all that dissimilar to what happened in the US. So I don't know that, like, we look at what happens abroad and we paint it as this, like, golden example, but I don't know that it's all that different.
But can I just amplify Randy's point, because he was absolutely correct, that the crucial difference between the UK and some other countries in the US was there's no coordinating body here. In the UK, you had APACs as the coordinating body, and they set up the working groups and had the retailers and the banks around the table. There was no coordination here, and I think that's where things went off the rails a bit.
But there was, though.
That's where the EMF was formed.
Oh, we're not, we don't have an enforcement role. We're more trying
You're
to.
speaking about a coordinating
unite.
body that had a say and could enforce, rather than join us, it will help.
Yeah.
No, that's a fair point.
Yeah,
I think
and
Randy's right.
it's a smaller country, I think you'll agree, so it was easier to get everybody in a room.
Well, it was also a more concentrated, there were a smaller number of big banks driving it, right?
Right,
Who
that's
also did
exactly
the
right.
acquiring as well, so they
Yes.
control both ends of the system versus we have this three-part ecosystem where the banks and the acquirers and the processors are three separate entities, and then you have all of the various.
All of us kind of goes back to arguing
I was
the liability
looking at the
shift.
tweets. I haven't seen. So wait, I'm sorry. Can I just interrupt one quick second? For those who are online, we are accepting questions from you through Twitter. Hashtag NYPAY. I've been watching. I haven't been rude. I'm not checking email, but I haven't seen any questions come through on Twitter. If anybody who's online would like to ask one, please send them through. And Deb, if you notice it and I don't, please interrupt me. I was gonna say, like, I think I'd like to just move on for a second. And Manesh, I was gonna ask you a question that's related. Have you seen, from where you sit, has Durbin been part of the debate or the discussion from where you sit? Like migrating in debit. Debit's been a little bit of a unusual animal in the US, the debit migration to EMV. Has Durbin impacted that? Like what would be the debit specifically the debit perspective on what's going on?
So huge impact. I mean, right off the bat, it has been, and Randy will probably be familiar with this, but it has been a primary source of debate for the EMV Migration Forum and any other forum that addressed chip technology coming to the U.S. So in a nutshell, quick reminder, Durbin, one of the fundamental tenets of Durbin suggested that merchants should have choice of routing transactions. And that was pivotal, meaning that today when they when a mag swipe is done, the merchant host processor should, in theory, be able to exercise, I'll just call it least cost routing for argument's sake, to find the least possible route to minimize the merchant fees. And therefore, it's a win-win overall.
Which is something that didn't exist anywhere else.
What's that?
Which is something that didn't exist anywhere else.
Yeah, so it was the routing choice that was that was put in place for debit point-of-sale transactions specifically, was the piece that caused the biggest challenge on the chip technology as it came to the US. And again, having come from the UK EMV background, I was scratching my head, understanding debit pretty well, but not really getting my hands around it. The net of it is it was never a technology problem. It was never a technology challenge, but a business constraint that caused the entire, chip movement to consider other options. And what I mean by that is you really have to go into the chip technology and look at what gets put on a chip card itself. The chip is made up of applications. Applications are represented by application IDs, and standard de facto global branded cards that are chip-based when they're produced would effectively come out with proprietary applications on that chip. Those proprietary applications have business restrictions that suggest that when a merchant accepts that application at the point of sale, that merchant, according to business constraints, does not have routing choice anymore.
So if you use this card, it has to go for my network.
I would say
that's a de facto chip.
Wait, I would just add one bit of clarity to that.
Sure.
So chip was created to say that there would be an application identifier for each application on the chip.
But that was in the technology from the beginning.
The implication was that a debit card might have 3 applications on it. So in the US, the vision in '95 was NICE would have an application on the card with its own AID, and Visa would have its own application on the card with its own EMV AID.
Yeah.
And when you put the card in the terminal, you would get routing choices by selecting which brand you wanted to.
Let me clarify. When you swipe a card, the brand acceptance at the terminal is kind of a soft acceptance. It's those logos you see on the terminal. We accept Visa. If you look at the debit networks, one of the biggest things about the US is there are 18 regional debit networks. That's a big deal. Every one of those debit networks is a candidate for choice of routing, assuming it plays in that card. So when you look at swiping a card, those logos represent agreements between merchants and issuers and networks, that those brands are accepted at those terminals. You fast forward to a chip world, you're not going to put 18 applications on a chip card. What you are going to do is find some common ground that says, I want portability, just like you do with a magstripe card. So on the back of a magstripe, if those who are familiar with debit cards and use debit cards, there'll be a front-branded global network. On the back will be co-branding. So if each of those brands represented an application, that's a pretty expensive proposition. And it creates a portability challenge. If an issuer changes networks, it creates a portability challenge. So where I'm going with this is the de facto chip manufacturing of a card would, for example, if it's a Visa card, and I'll just give you an example, it has a VSDC application on it with a Visa Global Application ID. When that's accepted at a merchant, the merchant can only route it through one network if it's a proprietary application. So what we did through the efforts of the EMV Migration Forum and the Debit Network Alliance, they got together and said, let's create a common application where we level the playing field and say this common application, once it's on that chip and accepted by the merchant, it reinstates routing choices that are enjoyed today in the magstripe world. So in that effort, each of the global brands responded in kind by creating a common application ID. So Visa has one, MasterCard has one, Discover has one, and for those that aren't branded as such, the Debit Network Alliance has an application ID. What's more important on the ecosystem, besides the standard EMV challenges, you've now got the rollout of the common AID to ensure that that makes it out to the terminals from an acceptance perspective. And some of the challenges during migration that we're seeing is, let's just get EMV done and we'll worry about the common later. Well, you've got to touch the terminal again. If you really want routing choices and you want to get this done right at the terminal, you've got to have special configurational logic that says, I will prioritize common applications if that exists on the chip, if I want to exercise my routing choice as a merchant. And at the same time, issuers, to remain Durbin compliant, have to encode chip cards to have a common AID, and if they want international acceptance, a global AID. And the common AID is national acceptance only, because Durbin only applies to the US. So I sort of basically summarized, Randy, probably 3 years of hard labor.
You did very well.
3 years of hard labor and lots and lots of discussion, every moving part in this ecosystem, and the acceptance of an emerging AID. Well, if you create a brand new AID, immediately you've got to push it out to all these terminals. So that's a challenge in itself. So there's the debit challenge for EMV was that the soft logos you had on the terminals translated to tangible application IDs that either did or did not give you routing.
Well, the amazing thing was that was solved in 3 months by the EMV Migration Forum.
There was also the back office implications of how you manage keys and
Huge.
applications that are unique.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's not just software and a card in a terminal.
And the thing about it was, if you put more than one application on the chip, that's more real estate on the chip that you're occupying. Every application is licensed, and you're occupying more real estate, and
So basically, they introduced EMV in the U.S. to try to gain back some of the traffic it lost because of Durbin. Well, I mean, in the end, they had to pick up the AID, but still.
My point is, it was recognized very early on. As soon as October 15th liability shift was much more embraced, we had a countdown going on. Literally, there was 655 days till, and we would count down every quarter to say, when are we going to get this common AID problem solved? And truth be told, the forum responded very well. There are recommended best practices to getting it done. The challenge now is executing on it. And the execution of that is itself going through a migration.
So we are running.
I'll get off my soapbox.
We are running kind of late, and I wanted to just honor the one question from Twitter.
It's a very simple question.
I don't know if
do you have it in front of you? Because I just locked again. So it's a question
that
from
whole complexity was another reason why implementation with some retailers that do a lot of debit card transaction was a big challenge.
The question from Twitter, maybe can you repeat it so that
I'm sorry.
Does the panel, anybody on the panel, have any recommendations for temporary actions networks could take to compensate merchants for losses beyond their control?
Do you want to credit that to who wrote it?
Jim Shanahan.
So Jim Shanahan wrote, does the panel have any recommendations for temporary actions networks could take to compensate merchants for their losses beyond their control?
I mentioned.
I guess
So you want Visa or MasterCard to compensate retailers for chargebacks that
No, I think they should create the rule set to allow
the issuer
something.
banks.
I agree. I was just going to add,
what would that mean, a rule set to allow something?
there's efforts going on. Chargeback, if you want chargebacks and exception processing to work fairly, you've really got to log enough EMV data to really say, was this transaction done in the right way or not? It doesn't address what Avi mentioned earlier. That was a different problem. Yeah. But chargeback best practices need to be readdressed and aligned for EMV usage, because what's happening is, if you don't have enough proof that this was run as a chip-on-chip transaction, then I think, as Avi alluded to earlier, the weakest link will get all the blame.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I was going to say chargebacks existed in the payment associations to make sure that people are fairly compensated when they suffer an unfair loss. They don't exist to allow people to game the system. And when they do get abused in that way, the associations, all of them, work very hard to find out what's going on to correct the discrepancy, because they really don't exist to punish people or let people game the system.
It was set up that way.
They're not doing it now.
Well, you could be sure that they're trying to, but the systems are complex. Jay was telling me he downloaded the chargeback guide. It's 500 pages. It's not a trivial thing.
Adam,
There just needs to be a process to be for a merchant to gain recourse.
They're public companies.
Yeah.
Adam, if you institute these rules and regulations, right? That's the issue. The issuing brands have to follow the rules and regulations that are, Visa and MasterCard have their rules and regulations.
Yes.
You have to police them.
Of course.
And, well, it seems,
And they are.
Okay,
Well,
They are. It doesn't mean that they're going to solve every one, but they are policing.
well, because the rules on the EMV are probably too broad then. If it was,
Because it takes time to investigate.
Why is it
We're
more
talking
than
about
most
millions of transactions happening a day with people who are still learning the process. The merchants are learning the process about how chargeback works because they never had to deal with it before.
No, there's no recourse. There's nothing to learn.
There is absolute recourse.
There's zero. Do you want me to show
There's
you?
recourse.
Want me to show you?
rules,
I've got a
there is
stack
recourse.
this big.
In the
Wait,
rules,
wait,
there
but
is-
I think I
big of
can
no
help. I
recourse.
could just help with a little bit of clarity here. Having read the MasterCard rules, the MasterCard rules allow for recourse, but merchants don't have a contract and a business relationship with MasterCard or Visa. They have a contract with an acquirer, and the relationship they have with the acquirer and the recourses they have may not be identical or.
We actually get it
what
from
they
the
have
issuer.
to
We get the
say.
no recourse. We get the chargeback with the no recourse. The acquirer sends it to us, but it's on the letterhead of the issuer. So whatever the issuer is, it'll say
so it sounds
no
like in that
recourse.
case, it sounds like in that case, your acquiring bank has elected not to
Well,
take up. It sounds like it. If they're getting a note that says no recourse.
It's not to say that the system couldn't be improved and enhanced. It's not to say that 4 years ago, when they made this announcement and wrote the chargeback rules, that they envisioned every potential vector for someone to abuse it.
but I think
But the
there has
problem
to.
is that they have taken from the motivation to make it better. So they've created a disconnect between the people with the power to make it better and the people incurring the costs.
So I'm gonna,
Avi doesn't
Jay,
have the power to make it better, but he's incurring the cost of
Correct,
making it better.
correct. So there should be an oversight, there should be an entity that acts on behalf of the merchants to make sure that the rules and regulations are followed and policed
Which
by.
should
Jay,
be
so I would say,
but-
look, excuse
But
me.
that's not,
Yeah,
that's,
Excuse me.
their job.
I think we are now,
because they make money on those.
we are now
It's their job to enforce the rules.
Right.
We are now 5 minutes over, so what I'd like to do very, very quickly, I would like to give people a couple minutes to just, if there's anything that didn't come up that you wanted to say, I've been a little disrespectful and interrupted people a bunch of times. So I would just
That
like
kind of
to,
panel.
I would just like to go down the panel and just say, take 30
I'll
seconds,
go
take a
last.
minute.
I'll go
But the
last.
things that need to be
I wanna
said.
go before
that we
Lake,
can
so I
set.
have some time.
So, Avi, would you, can I start with you, please?
Yeah, I'll start with my answer to the question to the Twitter person. Oh, by the way, I just got a tweet, Donald Trump won, so.
Yes.
Indiana, so it'll make something great again, right?
You're a businessman in New York?
Vote of the night. Vote of the night.
Yeah, no. He's not going to solve this problem. I mean, Bernie Sanders would have solved this problem because those evil banks and issuers. Okay. But what would I do? I would first of all, any chargebacks from October 1 until now that were card-present chargebacks that normally would not have been charged back. Any card-present chargebacks should be given back to the merchants. If not, give the merchants the percentage of the interchange that was attributable to fraud. I mean, the banks can't have it both ways. And number two, what I would do is I would, in terms of regulation, I would shift, if you do have the fraud liability, you cannot have the fraud liability shift kick in until some percentage of the ecosystem is ready. And I'll just use 80% as an example. If you tell me that 80% of the ecosystem is ready, then surely you can't hold back technology for the remaining 20%. But right now, I believe it's exactly the opposite.
Thank you, Avi. And thank you for coming. I know this isn't a comfortable forum, so I appreciate you being here. So thank you, sincerely, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Manish?
So I'll just piggyback on Avi's comments. I'll go back to one of your first questions. Has EMV been a good thing? So I think it's become a platform from which all new technology is hopefully going to piggyback off. You talk about EMV contactless, mobile contactless, but the migratory phase is the most painful. And we've addressed, we've moved mountains here. We've addressed debit challenges. We've addressed bringing EMV, that's a proven technology, into this country so far. The migratory challenges are big because until we get to that 80% where all the gaps are filled, there'll be significant pain for everybody. And I just leave with the one experience, I think, a consumer experience we have to solve here, and I'm not making this one up, but 2 weeks ago at the airport, I went to a McDonald's, and I'm an Apple Pay user, so I tapped my Apple Pay, didn't work. So I said, blow this, get my card out. So I took my card out, swiped it, it redirected me because it was a chip card, so I inserted the card. The card chip read failed. Redirected me back to swipe that card, and finally I got accepted.
Is this in a quick service restaurant?
Four payment interactions to get my French fries.
You're probably been charged 2-3 times.
Okay, so, well, I checked. Fortunately not. I think the exception handling was good. But my only point is that the experience is going to be painful until all the different parts of the ecosystem are solved. And that is the migration problem that we're going through. But, it's like anything. It needs discipline from every payment entity in the ecosystem. No one individual can bear the entire burden.
So thank you, Manesh, and thank you also for coming and sharing with us. Simon, please.
I'd like to just talk quickly to the entity that's not been discussed tonight, which is the cardholder experience. We've talked a lot about sort of how everybody else has coped with the migration, but I guess from my perspective, the least thought through entity of all throughout this whole thing has been the cardholder and how they feel about having this new piece of technology in their hands. How do they address, a different experience at the point of sale? How do they cope with a different experience for every retailer they go to? Just an experience between a Trader Joe's and a CVS is completely different for a cardholder. Perhaps we should have addressed this migration from the bottom up, thinking of cardholder first rather than brand down. And that might have given us a more smooth transition, at least from the user perspective in this system. There's been a lot of talk over the last couple of weeks about Quick Chip from MasterCard and Visa, and from my perspective, it's kind of missed the point. Perhaps I don't think it's good or bad, but I think perhaps it's missed the point of what's going wrong. I used my US issued chip and signature card in Colombia this week, and it worked brilliantly quickly. There was no issues. It was a quicker transaction in Colombia using my American issue card than it was in a US merchant. So there's something not quite working yet with implementation, and we've got to get that right. So I think that
Avi's 80% point.
Yeah, and I think to Avi's point, and getting the cardholder embracing this technology and using it day in day out consistently in every merchant is critical.
Do you have a word, please?
Well, I just want to say that I'm for new technology. I think that the technology that we adopted is not new technology, it's existing technology that's probably, in my vision, a little outdated. I think we should have gone more in towards the telecommunication, the phone systems. But anyway, we're there now, and I don't think we should turn back the clock. I just want to say something on chargebacks. So I've been heavily involved in chargebacks. As you know, I used to be the chairman of the board of the MAG. The last meeting we had, last conference we had on the board meeting, we had sessions with Visa and MasterCard, and Visa and MasterCard admitted that it had been a very sloppy, let's say, process on their end too. They've seen a lot of things that should not have happened, but they happened, and they promised us they were putting some systems in place to better police and control what was going on. By just saying that, they admitted that there was a lot of things going on, and you might have been hit with chargebacks that you shouldn't not have been hit with. And I think you're right. We should go back and investigate these things. The other thing is that merchants within the organization created something which is called Prociant, that's what I'm leading up now, and it is an automated solution to handle chargebacks and retrievals. But not only that, we thought as merchants, like we brought up before, there has to be an entity that works for the merchants and make sure that the rules and regulations that were one-sidedly implemented by the card brands are actually followed by the issuing banks that signed up to issue their card through the Visa or MasterCard rails. And like they admitted themselves, that has not been done. And with anything else, if there is like fees involved and penalties, there should be a system that checks that. And it cannot just be a one-sided thing. The people that get feed and get punished and get an extra charge and should have a recourse and should be able to police these things. And that's our mission, not just automating the whole system, but making sure that the system is fair. At the end of the day, all we want to do is combat fraud and bring fraud down. Fraud always has been like, it started here, it was thrown over the fence to the merchants, and they had to reply and try to throw it back. And nothing actually was done to prevent fraud. There is no national negative database on credit cards. Visa has its own database on negative cards. MasterCard has it, Amex has it, Discover has it. There's nothing combined like you have in the check world where you have a negative database on people that write bad checks. There is no such thing. And we think that something like that has to be implemented. You can't just work in silos.
You don't need it if you implement EMV properly.
Well, but Simon,
just take that opportunity. I'm going to take that opportunity.
There's two things there.
I'm going to take that opportunity.
Now wait a minute. It's properly, and the other thing is EMV is not going to work online.
I didn't talk.
Right.
So,
and that is a business that's growing.
All over which to have that discussion.
Is huge.
So,
and the channel in between, which is called the omni-channel.
Let's have that conversation about the card not present channel, please. Okay.
Randy,
On a different panel.
Randy,
different
Full
ways.
new domain.
Yes. So in my 4 years of being at the EMV Migration Forum and participating in discussions with bright people from the debit networks and the brands and the issuers and the merchants and the acquirers and all of the software and hardware vendors, I've really come to appreciate just how complex the U.S. payments market is for EMV and implementing anything. And so it's really difficult to sit in judgment right now in a process that is only partly being implemented and make judgments about what we should have done or what we can still do without seeing through an understanding that with every possible alternative, there are other mitigating factors that we're going to need to be considered as well. So things like PIN versus signature, is a huge issue that can't be drilled down to saying that, well, PINs are more secure, so of course every card should have PIN. There are underlying discussions that go well beyond the rationale for chip and PIN versus chip and signature. The same thing with trying to manage the ubiquity of payments across not only the credit cards and the debit cards, but the prepaid cards and gift cards and contactless and mobile devices and such. We couldn't possibly throw enough things in the soup and stir it around and expect it to come out any better than it has. And I think we are still doing an amazing job despite all of that, and the progress needs to be looked at in terms of how far we've gone and not just the things that we haven't done well.
Thank you very much. I want to
Adam, can I just add? We're transforming a 40-year-old ecosystem in less than 3 to 5 years. That's what we're trying to do. So I think we should actually be very very pleased with the progress so far, even though it's had a lot of cuts and bruises.
So thank you for that. I want to thank the panel very much for coming, for contributing, and for allowing me to moderate. Lee, I want to apologize. I want to thank David True and Deb Baxley, who really, this panel wouldn't exist without them. It really was their hard work that helped pull it together, so thank you guys. And sorry we didn't get to any questions.
And thank you again. This has been probably the most dynamic panel I can recall at NYPAY, and that wouldn't have happened without your contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.